Hey, everybody. We are so glad to have you on today. Um, I'm glad to see that we've got people from a little bit everywhere. Ross in Australia, Simon from Vancouver. Yeah, we're just happy to have all of our friends on, and we're obviously excited to have our special guest. But before I get into that today, who is joining us for the first time for Leadership Matters? This is episode 12. Well, as you know, we'll be exploring the concept of respect and bias and the challenges that come with this. We've obviously got the resident expert on this from at least from our set of friends and colleagues. But how many's joining for the first time? Let me just explain what we're up to here in Leadership Matters. We started this because we wanted to take on the very toughest leadership problems that you all are struggling with. We're struggling with them. And so the way that the format of this show works is we ask our community of Leadership Matter insiders, you're on today, so now you're in the community, just what is it that you're struggling with? And we've taken two problems that you've submitted. There was a trend that we saw. And we're going to take on two of those challenges. And Kim was gracious enough to come on and join us to take on these two challenges, which deal with the problems that she's an expert in. But before we get started, here's what we want from all of you. This is, we're kind of, we see this as like a collective intelligence to work on these problems. So while we're sharing the wisdom that both Liz and research have Liz and Kim have gleaned from their research, we want to hear from you. So put into the chat things that you have found to work, solutions that have been meaningful to you in your careers, or if a leader has demonstrated something to you that you want to laud them, please put that in. And we scan the chat and look for the very best gems of wisdom that we can, of course, share with the larger community who's not joining us today. So with all that being said, and we will be doing a question and answer at the end of the show today. So if you've got a question for Kim, get it ready. I'll say one more thing. Kim was brilliantly generous, and we are giving 30 copies of Radical Respect to people that submitted a challenge. So we emailed out, there's a link, look for it if you didn't see it, but submit a challenge on what you'd like to see in a future show. And for those of you, for the first 30 that submit a challenge, we'll be sending you a copy of Radical Respect. Okay, with that, let's get started. I just want to read a few things as I introduce Kim. I mean, it's really pretty incredible what she's accomplished, because she's not just a thought leader. She was, the real deal, an executive at the world's best companies prior to her first book, Radical Candor, which I enjoyed. And then now with what we're talking about today with Radical Respect, she's been the coach to CEOs of Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and other tech companies. Led the learning within Apple. And I don't know if most of you men I know this, but Apple doesn't really bring people in to develop learning. At least they didn't for years. I mean, now they have Radical Candor, they have Multiplier, but for years Apple was kind of like a closed group. And Kim was really it's an honor to be in that early position of her guiding the work at Apple University. She lives here with her family in Silicon Valley. Before her work as coaching and doing the research, I just want to mention that she led at Google, AdSense, YouTube, DoubleClick, and of course teams throughout. Seriously, Kim, we are thrilled to have you on, and thanks so much for being generous for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for our conversation today. Been looking forward to it.
Thanks, Kim. And before we jump into the conversation, I've been excited to have Kim here because I've wanted to introduce Kim. Now, Sean told you about her professional bio. I mean, professionally speaking, we all know Kim is a powerhouse. But what I feel like I get a glimpse into, and what some people might sense, but maybe not fully know, is that Kim is just like an amazing human being and a person who is kind and generous and respectful. Kim, I was go ahead and squirm just a little bit.
I'm blushing, but you can introduce me anytime, Liz.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
being an author, you get to meet a lot of other authors, and Kim and I kind of get together periodically for lunch, and I've been at her house, and I think Kim, last time we got together at your lunch, at your house for lunch, We had leftover tacos.
Yes, we had they were delicious, I think, the leftover
I think
tacos.
we had leftover tacos, and I brought I think warm chocolate chip cookies. Like
Delicious, delicious.
we just
Really.
kind of
We had such a great conversation about everything.
and Kim is kind and she is generous. And I remember this one moment where I was telling her about my son, and a lot of people know about my wild child son who was off like building structures, perhaps on property that he didn't own. And I was telling Kim my problem, and Kim lives on this lovely wooded piece of property here on the peninsula in San Francisco Bay Area. And Kim, I don't know if you remember your
I do.
response.
I was like, he can come build here, or can I go sleep in his structure? It sounded so cool.
She's like, I've got trees. He can build his like tree house here on my property. And I was just so struck by the generosity and the warmness of that. And then um, I don't know how long it was after, but there was some sort of natural disaster. And Kim, I don't know if you remember this, but on like there are a lot of people who were like without a home for a time. And I don't know what it was. All I remember is Kim's response on social media was, hey, if someone needs a place to camp out, like you can come to my
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
Like you
We
could
have
come,
room.
yeah, we have room. Like you can come here. This is Kim Scott. And I'm just so thrilled that we're talking about respect and inclusion and how do we counter the limitations of bias. And I'm glad that we're doing this in this holiday season that represents for so many traditions like light and hope and coming in on the new year being better. So anyway, Kim, we're thrilled that you're here.
Well, thank you. And I think everybody already knows what a warm and wonderful person you are, but they might not know how good your chocolate chip cookies are. So,
Yeah, there we go. Okay, Sean, what are we going to tackle?
Yeah, let's jump right into the first challenge. We've got two of these, and so let's get into the first. So this was submitted by our friend Jake, and here it is. I've noticed some team members are frequently interrupted or their ideas overlooked in meetings. I suspect unconscious bias, but I don't know how to address it without causing defensiveness. How can I create a more inclusive environment where everyone's input is valued? So, Kim, we'd love to go straight to you on this. Um, how uh, how do you handle this?
yeah, yeah. This is really hard. So I'm having a bunch of different thoughts all at the same time. So I'll just kind of popcorn them out. One is that you really you can't if your goal is to avoid defensiveness, you can't handle it. Like you're gonna have to like wade into these waters. I think that if you tell someone that they're doing something that is biased, I mean, certainly if you tell me, which I've been told, I mean, we all have our biases, it's natural to get defensive. I think that, it's one thing to have a growth mindset about a math problem, like, oh, isn't this wonderful that I made a mistake? I can get better in math. It's much harder to have it around something that feels like it's an assessment of your character. Like, oh, isn't it wonderful I did something biased? Now I can learn not to do it. Like, very few people have that reaction. And if you're expecting to be able to say it in a way that prompts that reaction, I think you're expecting too much. So we just have to kind of wade in. The other thing that I want to say about this particular bias is that there's more layers to it than there at first seem. Like I think a lot of people have heard that women tend to be interrupted more than men are, and that anyone who's sort of underrepresented along any dimension tends to get spoken over more often than someone who is, say, overrepresented. But Kieran Snyder, who's a great researcher on these topics, has done a lot of a deeper analysis, and she found also that women interrupt women as much as men interrupt women. And most interestingly, at least for me, because this really forced me to look in the mirror, is that women who are in positions of power interrupt everyone more than anyone else. And in part because I think, you know, but
Could this be me? Could it be me, Kim? I
it could be me. Yeah. So,
I don't know how powerful I am, but I feel like I maybe have fallen into that
yeah.
trap.
Probably because you had to. I mean, you've probably, there's this New Yorker cartoon where this man has a bullhorn and he's yelling at a woman, "Would you stop interrupting me while I'm interrupting you?" And
Kim, that's in your book. I just
yes.
I'm gonna show that. I'm gonna find it here because I remember reading it in your book. I'll hold it up when we get to
When
the
you flip
point.
to the page,
Yeah,
yeah. But
I'll find it.
but I think that it's really so I don't want to give powerful women a harder time than they already get. So let me just like lay that out there. But I do think it's worth recognizing that I believe anyway that the problem here is not men or women. I think there is an issue of power. And as soon as you gain some power in a situation, either whether it's positional power or whether it's because you're part of the majority, but any situation where there you go, hold that up. I love that cartoon. Um, any radical respect, there you go, good product placement. Anytime you're in a situation where you have a little bit of power in a situation, you're more likely to interrupt others, even if you don't think of yourself as an interrupter. And I think that helping people become aware of that is really important. I think the thing that's most likely to trigger defensiveness is to go into this conversation with this person saying, "You're interrupting them because of who you are and who they are." And it may be more just a function of the power of the situation. So I think that's one thought. I don't know. What would you say, Liz, to someone?
Well, I remember this moment where I think my camera's gone a little bit nuts. Is that better?
Yeah, you look good.
Am I better when I just cover up my face?
No, once you take it away.
I remember, I was in this meeting and it was all women, and I had just mentioned something really positive that had happened. I had just published Multipliers like a week before, and I
Yeah.
had mentioned this really exciting thing that had happened, and I was starting to talk about it, and one of the other adults, because this was a conversation of adults and teenagers, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the other adults jumped in and sort of like kind of hijacked the conversation and was taking it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit, I was disappointed because this was sort of a really important moment.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the teenagers, this young teenage woman, she said, "Hold on." She said, "Liz was talking about something that was important." And it wasn't that she recognized it was important to me so much as she's like, she was saying something that was really important. And I was really interested in what she was saying.
Yeah.
Like, can we go back to that point in the conversation? Liz, could you keep going with that? And it was a teenager who had kind of come to my aid in this moment, which is someone just yanked the microphone from you. And
Yeah.
that felt a little unfair.
Yes.
And, she's, of course, not the most powerful person. She's in her teens.
Yeah.
But it taught me that we can come to people's aid when someone is getting their voice drowned out, their comments being the conversation is being hijacked, their comment is being kind of swiped
Yeah.
and stolen by someone else. That we don't have to be the most powerful person in the room. And it didn't have to be a conversation of like, gee, you're disrespecting her. It
Yeah.
was just
Yeah.
like, hey, that person was trying to say something.
Yes. Yeah. She was a great upstander is what she was. She intervened in some way. And we can intervene in these moments, but I bet everyone who's on this call with us has had a moment in the last, if not 24 hours, 48 hours, where somebody said or did something in a meeting that sort of made you cringe. It was so biased it made you cringe, but you didn't know what to say. You just kind of felt like crawling under the table. Anybody been in that situation? Like, it's really hard to be an upstander. You don't know what to say, and so one of the things that I encourage leaders to do in radical respect about bias, to create a sort of an organization where bias doesn't get in the way, is to put into place bias disruptors. And there's three parts to this. The first is you need a word or phrase, and don't dictate the words to your team. You're not the word police or the word dictator. Like, ask your team, what word or phrase would you all use to disrupt bias in the moment? Because it's hard to know what to say. I like to wave a purple flag, but other people, it's a friendly purple flag. It's not a yellow flag. It's not a red flag. Other people I've worked with, other teams I've worked with, will say, ouch, giving the person who said the bias thing the opportunity to say, oops. I mean, just like to keep it sort of quick. But the point is, once you know what the word is, then when someone on the team notices bias, they know what to say. And so that's number one. Step number two is to have a shared norm for how to respond when you're the one who has said or done the bias thing. Because I don't know about you all, but when someone points out to me that I've said or done something biased, I'm always going to feel defensive. I'm going to try to manage that. I'm going to feel more than defensive. I'm going to feel ashamed. you know, I can tell you where I feel it in my body. I feel a tingling in the backs of my knees. The same thing if my kids walk too close to the edge of a precipice. That's how I feel. Like, it's a real fear. And when my brain is hijacked by fear, my executive function is shut down. So teaching people on your team how to re-engage their executive function when they get told that they've said or done something biased, I think is important. So, and it can be as simple as, thank you for letting me know. I get it and I'm working on it. Or, thank you for letting me know, but I don't know what I did wrong. Can you tell me after the meeting? And the reason to ask to tell me after the meeting is the promise of bias disruption is that it will disrupt the bias, not every single meeting you ever have. And then the third thing you need is a shared commitment, because you can come up with the vocabulary, you can talk about how to respond, and then you're not going to do it anyway because it's so uncomfortable. And so you need to get into the habit of, if you get to in fact, maybe we can do this. If we get to the end of this call and nobody has pointed out, I'm going to encourage everyone. I'm going to say something biased in the next 30 minutes. Unfortunately, I'm going to try not to, but I probably will. So if we get to the end and nobody has disrupted my bias, we're going to stop and think about what I might have said.
So, Kim, can we do that with someone just, throwing the word purple?
Yeah. Just put the word purple in the chat, and then we'll pause and figure out and I'll try to respond well.
Kim, there's some research someone told me about. It's actually a friend of mine who was on this research team that, was looking at like what happens when people's voices get drowned out, which is kind of at the core of this challenge. And it was a team, I think it was out of like University of Kansas, but the team, I wrote it down: Kristen Bain, Tamara Krebs, and Nathan Mickle, and Elizabeth Tenney. And Nathan is the friend of mine. And what they found, you probably have read this research, Kim, is that when people see people whose voices are not being heard, and they jump in and they amplify it, like, someone's talking over Sean, and I jump in and say, wait a minute, hold on, Sean had something important to say here. Or, like as Sean was saying, if we do this, that amplification not only gives a status boost to the person who was being drowned out, the Sean in this case, it also provides a status boost to the amplifier.
Yes.
And I thought that was really fascinating, is we're not seen as necessarily disrupting. It's this kind of pro-social, positive thing. So like I would offer that into this as an encouragement when we defend people's voices. It actually builds credibility for everyone involved.
Yeah. And you can do it to yourself. I mean, the other day I was at a dinner, and a woman at the table said something, and I sort of disagreed with her in a way that was very clever but not very nice. And it took the conversation in the direction I wanted it to go in. I was like, why was I such a jerk just there? And so I took a step back and I said, but maybe I'm wrong. I want to hear what you had to say. I think I cut you off. And what she said was so interesting, and we had a great conversation, and I was glad that I had done that. But it's really hard to recognize it when you've like it, because I don't think of myself as a jerk, but we all do things we wish we hadn't done sometimes.
Mm.
Rana just said, Liz, if you don't mind, she asked, this is a good question in chat. It's a simple question, but I think it's important, is how do we encourage team members to call out bias in a constructive way? What would you say, kid?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I recommend the purple flag. Like, if everybody knows what it means, then it's expected. It's more expected that that we do it. I think another thing that I've done with some teams who have said the purple flag thing was just too awkward for them is they all sat down. I think everyone on the planet has a red word, which is some phrase which if you use it, I'm not going to hear another word you say for the next 5 or 6 sentences. And
Mm.
it's going to be easier for you to avoid that word than it is for me to change my attitude about that that word, because like it's deeply so, and everybody has a different one. And so for me, if you call me a girl instead of a woman, like it to me, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Not all women feel that way, and that's okay. But when you're talking to me, you're not talking to all women. You're just talking to me. And so, if you can be aware, you don't have to be aware of every unconscious bias on the on the planet. But if you can be aware of the words that you might say that really make it difficult for the people in the room, the people who you work with on your team, then that doesn't mean that nobody will ever say those words, but you can begin to hold each other accountable for not using those particular words. And it's going to be, on a team of 5, it's probably 5 words. Do you have
Mm.
a red word, Liz?
Well, it is fingernails on the chalkboard when I hear people describe, whether they're men or women, regardless of gender, when they talk about the girls they work
Mm-hmm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually just kind of quietly say, I don't think they're girls. Like, I think
Yeah.
they're women.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
um, so whether that's men or women saying that, that's one that's hard for me to hear. And I
Yeah.
do lose track of what people are saying because I'm
Why
like,
would,
how
yeah.
young are their staff?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Are they violating child labor laws?
exactly. Um, but I also have to admit that I'm now at the age where I don't mind it if someone calls me a girl, like, because I'm so clearly in the girl phase of
Yeah.
my life. If someone says, or hey, miss, like, I love it when people like at restaurants will be like, they call
Yeah.
me miss. I'm like, clearly not a miss, but
Yeah. It's okay.
yeah, that's a hard one for me. I'll have to think of another. Kim, I've got a question I want to ask you
Hmm.
is, we've been talking about how do you spot that um like lack of inclusion, little moments of disrespect. How do you, counter that bias? How do you do this when you feel like you're in an environment where there's pushback against the bias button? They feel
Yes.
like I've got bias fatigue or I'm angry that, like, and I know some organizations have felt like, okay, maybe there's some fatigue. And so we're going to swing the pendulum back, which I never find to be a useful
Yeah.
reaction to sort of
Yeah.
swing pendulum
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
spaces. Um, how do you do this when you know there's going to be some just pushback, not because of the situation, just because an overall tone?
Yeah. Yeah. I w- so Radical Respect, when it first came out, it was called Just Work, and it was much longer. When it came out in hardback, and I got a lot of pushback on the language that I was using. And some of it I felt like was unwarranted, but some of it I felt like was I needed to listen to. I think that if you're gonna write a book that is encouraging people to create a more inclusive work environment, your language should be inclusive. And I think a lot of people felt excluded by the kinds of language that I was using, and so I shortened the book a lot, and I did review my language. So I think that was why I used the red word example, like the bias disruptor. Some teams were just like it that like
It's a red word for them?
Yeah, bias was a red word for them. And I'm like, okay, if you want to call it red word, and they were like, oh yeah, the red words are really helpful. And so that's an example of I didn't give up on the idea. I was like, we want to communicate well, and we don't want to accidentally piss each other off. And so let's figure out how not to accidentally piss each other off. I think the other thing that I've done is to sort of talk about how if you ignore bias, if you pretend, I mean, we all know it exists, and if you ignore it, then it's like an elephant in the room, and that is disruptive. That does not help you get things done faster. So somehow just like pointing it out and moving on, if what people want to do is get back to what they were trying to talk about in the first place, which is how we're going to launch this product, for example, um, helping them be aware that certain kinds of language is going to get in the way, it's going to slow them down. Bias is in many ways, I think, it's like dragging a heavy weight along with you. And if you can put it down, then you can move faster. And so sort of talking about it in those terms has, for me, at least been helpful. But there's a lot. I mean, the other day I was invited to do a talk in a state which had passed some anti-DEI laws. And they sent me a long list of words I'm not allowed to say. And I was like, I'm not promising you that I'm not going to say those words. I mean, I get it that but if the word police comes after me, so be it. you know, like this is not a country where we ban words and arrest people. And the list of words was ridiculous, frankly. Like you couldn't say, anyway, I won't go into it, but
We're getting ready to go into challenge 2, Kim. Thanks for that. Before we do, though, there's some, we've got another chat I think that's worth hitting. I'd love to hear from both of you on this. It's just about airspace. Thinking about interruption with this first challenge, where you have somebody that's maybe kind of like constantly interrupting others. What happens when you have a leader who, they just have a tendency to just constantly be sharing their point of view, interrupting others. They're just kind of eating up all the space. Liz, I know you've got a point of view on how to do this. So Kim, for you first, like, how do you deal with a leader who's just, they're always talking over people, and they're kind of taking all of the space? What's your strategy for this? And then Liz.
You mean if I'm coaching them or if I'm working for them?
Yeah, well, why don't you do both? If you're approaching them or if you're working for them.
Yeah. So if I'm coaching that person, I'll give them, there's so much research. Project, I can't remember whether it was Oxygen or Aristotle, but one of those two at Google. And also Amy Edmondson's work has, and Liz, I think you have research on this as well, that when everyone on a team talks roughly the same amount of time, the team does better. If one person dominates, it actually hurts the results that the team can achieve. And so with people I coach, I actually encourage them to use an AI note taker and to ask the note taker to quantify what percentage of time in that meeting did you talk. And to try, if there's 5 people in the meeting, you should talk 20% of the time, not more. And that, by the way, is also helpful for people who don't talk enough. Like, I think that's a really useful tool. It's one of the good uses of AI that we can have. If I were working for such a leader, if that leader were my boss, what I would try to do is actually what someone did for me. So I had a guy who worked for me, and he gave me the feedback. He said, Kim, you interrupt me all the time. And when you interrupt me, I feel like you don't care about what I'm saying. I should pipe down. Do you want me to pipe down? And I did not want him to pipe down. He had great ideas. And so I would try to do for my boss what he did for me. And if I'm coaching someone, by the way, I might share this guy and he and I talked about how I could stop interrupting, because it's like getting better at bad habit. It's hard to stop doing. And so I got a radical bander. I got a big fat rubber band. And I said to my whole team, I said, look, Russ tells me that I interrupt him. I know it's true. I'll probably interrupt all of you. And so if you're sitting next to me, I need help with this. Asking for help is a great thing. I need help with this. And so if I'm sitting next to you and I interrupt someone, I want you to snap the rubber band. And we had the kind of team where people did snap the rubber, and it was excellent Pavlovian training. It helped me a little bit. But more importantly is it rewarded the candor. It sort of showed that I would respond well if you gave me the feedback.
Mhm.
Okay. I think, Sean, I'll break it up into like if I'm coaching someone, and this is like, I think probably most people here are probably familiar with this chip idea is, I encourage leaders to be really thoughtful about where you play your chips. And again, the focus not on just creating space for others, that like when you play fewer chips, you create space for other people to come in, if not a vacuum for
Yeah.
people to come in. But I try to help sell that concept with, and when you play fewer chips, your ideas are more heard.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't drowning you out. You don't become white noise to organization. And I find this is something in general, if you can look at like how it's a win for your team, but also how it's a win for you as a leader, it's a little easier for people to step into that space. If it's someone who I'm working with or working for, I think I would focus, I might share the same kinds of ideas, but I might focus on like what we're not hearing, like the dog that didn't bark in the Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes example. And I want to share a moment, and it was a defining moment for me in my career. I'm at Oracle. I'm running Oracle University, but there's these other education organizations, like large global companies. There's like all sorts of other training companies, and we got thrown into a task force to like kind of rationalize all that. And I don't know if I was leading this task force, but it doesn't take much for me to like step up, take the pen, and start to lead this. And we were making a tough decision about what we should do about a certain situation. And there was one person, we'll call him Joe, because his name was Joe. Um, and he was really dominating the conversation. And we got to a point, I'm kind of leading it roughly, but he said, okay, it looks like we've got consensus on this. Like we should do A. And I'm not even sure I was leading it, but
Yeah.
I could see some people like looked at me like, help,
Yeah.
because we did not have consensus. We had mostly heard from him. And so I stepped in this conversation. I was probably a good 20 years younger than him. And he ran like a large organization, and he had a lot of power in the organization. And I remember what I said, like verbatim, I said, no, I'm not sure we have consensus. We've heard your point of view on this subject, but we haven't heard from other people. And I think we need to hear from other people on this issue before we make a decision. And it was amazing how like the eyes just went over to me, and they were like, thank you.
Yeah.
Because, like he was like sort of ramming this decision through, but and I don't think he appreciated it, but the group appreciated it. And it was actually one of the reasons why it was defining, is it taught me like stand up when people are trying to bully ideas through. But it was amazing what happened to the other people, how willing they were to follow my lead on things.
Yeah.
They're like, because you are going to listen to us and defend us and stand up to people who aren't, I guess, being inclusive.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think it's also, so there's a really funny article about people who tend to bullshit. And people who have more power are more likely to bullshit. People who are in the majority are more likely to bullshit. It was like a very detailed study. People who are richer are more likely to. And it's so bad for a team where the person who doesn't really know but thinks they know is now also taking up all the oxygen in the meeting. It's not a great way to get results.
Mhm.
But it was a funny study where they asked people if they knew how much they knew about these various mathematical topics, and one of the topics was not really a thing. it was a made up word. And they examined who said they knew a lot about that made up thing, and it was really exactly what you would expect. And that's what you don't want in your in your meetings. That's not a great way to make decisions, is to make
Well,
stuff up.
and again, like I think part of the mindset is not just creating room for other people and being inclusive, we're helping that dominant leader not
Yeah.
make a fool out of themselves.
Yeah, not be that person who thinks they know all about this thing that's not even a thing,
Yeah, because they'll get through that meeting fine, but in the end,
Yeah.
they'll lose followership. People will know they're BSing their way through.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, Sean, should we move
Yeah,
on?
let's hit the second challenge here. This one's tough because it deals with the purse strings a bit. Here it is, challenge 2. One of my top performers confided that a key client has been making discriminatory remarks about their accents and has requested to work with someone else. This employee is demoralized and considering leaving the company. How should I handle the client relationship while I'm standing up for my employee and maintaining team morale? What do you think, Kim? How should we think about this first? And then what should we do about it?
Yeah, yeah. I will tell you a story about a time when I don't know if I was a top performer, but I was working at a consulting firm, and we were consulting to a steel mill, and the steel mill had one database administrator, and I needed to get some data from this guy, and over the course of a week, I like went 2 or 3 times a day to this guy's office. I need the data, and there was always like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And about 3 days into the week, the guy shows up at my hotel. I get a call in my hotel room, like at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. And he's down in the lobby, and I go down, and he has the bag of data, he has his, and he says he won't give it to me except up in my room. And I
Oh,
just
you did
looked at,
not.
yes, he
Oh,
did. And I looked at this
It's
guy.
not subtle. There's no points
No,
in
there
for
was no
subtle.
subtlety about it.
oh,
And I looked at this guy, and I was like, I'm not going to do it for the data. This is
God. Oh my
and I
goodness.
was so proud of myself. I thought, oh, what a clever response. But it never occurred to me, actually, that my company would have my back. So the next day, I was telling my boss on the project that this had happened, and I was telling it in like as though it were an anecdote, like as though I had handled it and that was the end of the story. And I was sort of also explaining why I still didn't have the data. and and my boss said, "Oh, we will fire this client." Um, and that was
Not
like,
not a client, an employee. He was an employee,
he
right?
was an employee of the client. So
Yes.
the consulting firm was going to have to terminate the consulting engagement. They were going to terminate the whole engagement. Um,
The whole engagement.
they were prepared to do that. And I was like, well, why don't you just talk to the CEO of the company and get him to deal with his employee? I don't think we need to terminate them. But the fact that they were so quickly willing to go there was that I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that they had my back. And I felt less alone, and like I had dealt with all kinds of stuff. Maybe not quite, well, some of it more egregious than that in my career. And this was the first time where someone took it seriously and took, and that was like a revelation. I will always feel grateful to that company and to the people at that company. And so I think if you really want to retain that employee, like you don't necessarily have to. I mean, that consulting firm was rolling in money, so it was easier for them to say, "Well, we'll just walk away from this money." But there's a lot of different ways you can show that employee. Like I'm going to report this to HR at this company, and you never have to talk to that particular person again. Like I'll put you on a better project, or like, but it's not enough to put that person on a better project. But you also have to go let the client know that it's not okay to talk to your employees that way.
Mm. But Kim, how do you how do you do that? How do you be an upstander and do the right thing? Because I think most people would know what the right thing to do is, but feel like I am caught between double goals here and competing interests. And there is, Sean, as you said, there's money at stake. And how do you de-risk it if you can't afford to fire that client? If you feel like you don't have the power
Yeah.
to take the stance, like, how would you think about that? Because I know people often find themselves, like, really caught
Yeah.
in this situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can always go to the client and say, look, something unfortunate happened. Yes, you don't go to the person who said the thing, but you go to their boss. You go to the most senior person you're working with. And you say, if I were in your shoes, I would want to know if I had an employee who was doing this. And so
Mm,
I'm not going to tell you how to handle it, but I want to let you know what happened. And so that's, I think, a reasonable thing to do. And if that client fires you because you told them that, then I think you have to at some level be prepared to take some risk. If you're not if you have zero willingness to take any financial risk, then it's going to be much harder for you to solve this problem. But I think it's also important to think about there's also a risk of losing that employee. There's also a risk of being the company who has a reputation with employees that you don't have their back. And so I think often when we're confronting these kind of attitudes and behaviors, the risk of confronting the behavior we feel in our gut, you know,
mm,
instantly. But if you slow down just a little bit and think about what is the risk of doing nothing? Because that is not also a zero risk. There are some risks. And what is the risk of stepping up? What is the reward of stepping up? There's often a reward. Like you said, there was a reward for you in saying, I don't think we have consensus. Like you built your reputation at that company. So I think sort of calculating carefully your ROI on speaking up. There's often a very positive ROI on speaking up, but it's more subtle. Like because what it doesn't punch you in the gut in the same way. I don't even, I don't want to touch this.
well, and I think a part of how we de-risk it as well is to understand timing on this.
Yes.
And, certainly acting swiftly is important, but also acting when you have maximum power.
Yeah, you could tell the person after they've paid you for the
Or yeah, like I think there's a line in Impact Players that says, like, we're at our most powerful before we say yes and after a success.
yes.
That's when we have our highest negotiating power inside of organizations. We just had one of these situations. We have kind of a general rule in our little Wiseman group, which is nobody on the team has to put up with disrespectful behavior from clients.
Yes.
If people and because I am who I am, I define disrespectful behavior as micromanaging. That is in the package of disrespectful because
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
saying, I don't think you're competent. I don't
Yeah.
trust you. I have to, like, ride you to get something done. And so I hope everyone on the team feels like you can walk away from any, like, opportunity if you don't
Yes.
feel like you're being treated well. We had a situation where it wasn't overtly disrespectful, but, like, we had an organization we were working with, and it was a lot of micromanaging, and it was burdensome to bear. And I said something to the
Hmm.
client
Hmm.
because they had really been micromanaging someone on the team, but I chose to say it after I had gotten done giving the keynote, which went really well.
Yeah.
And they were like, "We want to work with you some more." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not sure that there's going to be an opportunity to do that because we kind of have a policy. We don't work under situations where people are being micromanaged. And, like, you were pretty rough on some
Yeah.
members of the team. And, like, we can't do that." And so I'm choosing my timing well there. Now, obviously, if
Yeah.
this had been an acute situation, I would have done something immediately. But also, like, getting the timing on that helps embolden us.
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah.
like, it's not
Yeah.
okay. It's not okay, which is, I know you talk about in your book, it's like an it statement.
Yes.
It's not okay to micromanage members of our team and assume people are
Yeah.
idiots and are going to let you down.
Yeah, yeah, that's not it's not a productive way to work.
Yeah.
And we're not going to work that
Mhm.
we want to work productively.
And I love the comments from people about how, yeah, micromanagement is a form of disrespect. It is in my book, and I hope it is
Yeah.
in lots of people's book. Because
There was,
the
Liz, I don't know, did I tell you about the threat of no business if I didn't turn my camera on story?
No.
Okay, so I woke up really early. I was crazy sick a couple months ago. It was a client in Europe. And so I woke up at, it was probably 5 a.m., maybe a little before. I was really sick. I crawled right out of bed to get on this call. It was a Zoom call. I didn't turn my camera on. But I mean, I looked terrible and I was in my robe. And Liz knows I'll show up looking terrible. Like I
Yeah.
will show up like hair crazy, not chilled.
redhead.
But the
This is
problem
not
was,
shocking to anyone
no,
here.
but the problem was like I was in my robe and I just felt like, I don't know, like you could kind of like see my wannabe chest hairs and I was just like, there was no way I was turning on that camera. And so we get on the call and this the lady that I was speaking with said to me, Sean, if you don't turn your camera on, I will not do business with your company. And I was just kind of like, whoa, shocked by this. This was so weird. Like I woke up early to take the call and there was something that happened to me in that moment. First, I was like, gonna give it to her. But then second, I remembered the time earlier in my career when Liz and I were first working together that she said, hey, just so you know, anytime that you feel like that it's a bad deal with a client, we'd rather not take the money. We'd rather
Yeah.
just make sure that you feel respected. And it was a big client that we were working with. I won't name the name, but they, they're as big as they get. And there was a lot of money on the line. And I remembered in that moment, it's funny that that came back to me from 6 years before in this moment
Yeah.
where I was kind of like being threatened. You turn on
Yeah.
the camera or you walk at this. And I just said to myself, like, oh no, Liz, this would be one of those moments where my boss said, hey, do you
You don't
feel
have,
like that,
yeah.
there's just something's a little off? You don't need the business. And I just, I just shared I just was open. I was like, look, I'm in my robe. I'm like, I'm a mess. I would rather not. We didn't get the business, but it was okay because there had already been this precedent set that like I needed to be there was some basic things that I could ask for
Yeah.
from a respect perspective. It stuck with me and kind of gave me courage in that moment to like not click the camera button to save the deal, if you will.
Because it's
Yeah.
bad money. And I know there are people in situations where you feel like you have to take the revenue or something, but I always feel like, it's bad money. And I don't know, maybe bad money has bad juju that comes with it or something.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
it harms us when we make those compromises, even when there's upside opportunity inside of businesses. Sean, I'm
Yeah.
glad you didn't put your
Yeah.
camera. Glad you
I'm
did that.
glad you didn't turn that camera on either. It's very funny the things that people get self-righteous about. Um, it is I mean, they probably had a norm at their company that they keep their cameras on, which is fine, but you didn't work there and it's not like they told you beforehand that that was a requirement and a norm. And I think being tolerant of different norms is important, and also knowing what norms you're not going to be tolerant of. Like there was a question earlier, I've lost it in the chat, about working about a client that refused to work with women. Like, and that's a norm. I think you're within your rights of saying, well, that's half our company is women, or it's a woman founded company or whatever, and that's not, so you're not going to work with us. um, but but I think you want to have a discussion about a norm. You don't want to just assume that other people have to fall in line with your norms because they're paying you.
Yeah, no, and that was that for me. It gave me the ability to just not turn that camera on because it was a norm that was discussed, and Liz had made a point to discuss it with me when I felt like, maybe I had to for the money, and listen, that's
Yeah.
easy to feel that way
Yeah.
because it's part of your role. You're representing the company, and obviously we're not a not-for-profit company, and so we care, and so that can be sticky. Okay, here it is. We've got 8 minutes left. And we want to open it, Kim, up to question and answers. Thank you, everybody, for contributing so far. If you have a question for Kim, and this can be about any line of her work. So if you want to ask her about radical candor, a favorite of many of ours, or you want to stay with the topic that we're on, feel free to do it. But we're just gonna kind of watch those questions come into chat and take some as they come. But while we're waiting for questions, is there anything else, Kim, as we wrap up maybe this particular challenge that's on your mind about how to deal with a situation like this, where there's something going on that know's not very good from a client perspective, and you need to deal with it, but it's sticky.
Yes, but it looks like Liz has a question.
I have a question. If there's no one else who's got a question, I have one for Kim, and it involves a confession.
Okay.
I feel like, as someone who's probably always been sort of conversationally strong, which is a euphemism for like, did I just make up that term? Like interrupting, like I feel like I can hold my own, and I'm pretty good at
Yes.
holding my own in a conversation where maybe I'm being a little bit disrespected, not necessarily strength. I feel like there are times when there has been maybe some subtle disrespect, maybe some unconscious bias, maybe some prejudice that has I've experienced that I've brushed off because I'm like, I can handle myself.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So I think I fall into that camp. I have regrets about this
Mm-hmm.
because I thought for many years, I think I only thought about its effect on me, not its effect on the people who came behind me
Mm-hmm.
or the people who maybe weren't so conversationally or whatever. Like, what guidance would you give to the person who says, I don't need to make a fuss, I'm good, I've
Yeah.
got power, like I have enough power to withstand this little slight
Yeah.
or a big slight?
Yeah. I just like you, I feel like I went through so much of my career, la 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 la, like, and I think I did that. I want to extend some compassion for my younger self. I think I did that in part because if I had stopped to think too much about it, I would have experienced um, a, a level of rage that was debilitating. There's like, I never think denial is a great response to stuff going wrong, but I do think you have a right to choose your response. And I do think, especially early in your career, you have a right to choose silence as long as you feel like that's the right choice for you. What I would encourage for people, even early in their career, even what I would go back and advise my younger self, is to have made that silence a very conscious choice, rather than a default to silence. Because if you default to silence, you lose a sense of agency. And I will say that as I have grown in my career and gotten into a situation where I have a little bit more influence, now I feel like I have an obligation to respond for others. As a leader, it is your job to prevent these things from getting in people's way. And that was really part of the reason why I sat down and wrote Radical Respect. I remember when Susan Fowler wrote her blog post about the way she had been treated at Uber, I was like, oh my gosh, she is much younger, much earlier in her career, and so bold. Like, why have I been so silent on this for so long? And so that was like, it was very motivating for me, and inspiring to watch someone much younger, earlier in their career, decide to speak out, and to speak out so successfully and impactfully.
Yeah, thanks for that. Ross has a question. Ross Mooney says, Kim, do you have any advice for working with someone who is constantly in a defensive state, and how to bring down their walls to increase productivity?
Yes. I think that the most important thing here is to solicit feedback. Don't, I mean, telling someone there to stop being defensive is really a waste of breath. And so, but it's like telling someone don't be sad. Like, that's a waste of breath. Acknowledge the fact that this person is sad. So what I try to do when I'm working with someone who's very defensive is, if I say something, I'll say, I feel like I didn't say that in the best way. How could I have said that in a way that's more helpful to you? Because that is my goal in saying what I just said. I'm trying to be helpful. and I want you to succeed. And me being silent is not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. So you try to get on the same side of the table. And then when I do get some feedback from that person, and often if the person is super defensive, the feedback might come in the form of lashing out, and it may just feel mean. What I try to do is, before I react to that, is to look. I don't disagree with 100% of what the person just said. So I try to look for that. Like, sometimes when you're soliciting feedback, it's like you're panning for gold. It's mostly you're looking for that one tiny little gold flake in a pile of dirt. So look for that one or two things that the person said that I can agree with, and then give voice to that. And then remember that sometimes it's if you disagree with feedback, the best way to reward the candor is to offer a respectful explanation of why you disagree. And you can't argue forever, but you want to listen, challenge, commit. You don't want to skip over listen and challenge and go straight to commit. But especially if it's someone who is is working for me or in some way junior, I'll say something along the lines of, if we have data, let's do what the data says. But if all we have are opinions here, let's go with yours, and that can be disarming.
Yeah, that's good. I'm just looking at the time, and we've just enjoyed it with you, and have spent it. It's gone so fast. For those of you that didn't get your questions answered, listen, we'll gather those up, and do a little thinking on this, and come up with some responses. We are so grateful for both of you, really. I mean, listen, for those of you know, me and Liz have been buddies for years. We've worked together for almost 9 now. She has been a terrific coach to me and just kind of walks the walk with all these. Kim, Liz thinks the world of you, just so you know. She talks about like how awesome
Real
you are,
deal.
the real deal. And we all felt it today. We're just so grateful for you to be generous for your time. So listen, for those of you that asked about the book, we will be sending out 30 copies of Radical Candor. You'll get a link from Austin. Austin, you can come on and correct me if I'm wrong. And what we want is for you to put down a challenge just like you did. These 2 challenges, because Kim's generous, brought Kim to us today. Your challenges matter. Your tough challenges to us are really like the reason why we wake up and work so hard to do research. And with that, I'm going to give it to Liz for just 1 minute before we close. But thank you all. And Liz, maybe just a real quick plug for your research, and then we'll let them all go.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, for sharing their inputs and their insights. I love these sessions. I have a request. I am working on a new piece of research, new piece of work, and I'm doing that with my dear colleague, Lauren Hancock, our nerd who we gave the session off to. And we are doing a piece of research. We are studying how our early experiences and the people we work with, and the good bosses, the bad bosses, the ugly bosses, so to speak, like good, bad, ugly, how that shapes us as leaders, how it shapes how we show up, how we lead others. We have got a survey. It takes 14.7 minutes to complete this survey. That's what Qualtrics told us on this. If you have 14.7 minutes to spare and can help us with this research, I would love to get your insight. I'll drop the link there in chat. We also have a Audible credit or gift card to give you for that, so you can buy a book, you can buy one of Kim's books, you can buy whatever you want with that. But I would appreciate it. Lauren and I would very much appreciate it. Again, thanks for joining us in these conversations, wrestling with the hard matters of leadership. And Kim, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights, your intelligence. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited for your new research. So I'll fill out your questionnaire right now.
Everybody have a great weekend.
Take care. Happy weekend.